Breaking it down in layman's terms today, I got a special guest. I've got RajNATION, and I'm excited to talk to him today because I've been following this guy's content for about a year or so now. Awesome newsletter. Subscribe to the newsletter and go to his website and check out his podcast for more. But what Raj does is he really helps startups at all levels or companies that really need to have a better pitch, to get more money, to get investors, just do work. He does work. Raj, welcome in layman's terms from Chicago, Illinois. Break it down for me.
Dude, so from my podcast that I like to give those like hyped up intros, and I think that's the first time I've been hyped up on an intro myself. So I appreciate the love and I appreciate that introduction, brother.
Absolutely. Been checking out his podcast, and that's the first thing when you go to Raj's podcast. He's got this killer intro, and his intros, he hasn't deviated from it, but he really defines his pitch. He practices what he preaches in his intro. He tells you exactly what he works with. And then the creativity comes in because he gets the client who he's interviewing on the podcast and he name drops their city. So he gives it that personal element, which I love when it comes to video. One of the things that's really, really impressed me is, you work with entrepreneurs, startups at all levels. And, everybody needs to communicate. Everybody needs to have that story. Can you comment a little bit about the element of stories at different levels or where you position that?
Yeah. So, when I do my workshops, one of the things I often make the audience sort of recite back to me is this idea that I'll say, I'll use a curse word here, or I'll bleep out the curse word, but I'll say,
go ahead and cuss.
It's okay. I can. All right.
All right.
So it's, my product does not mean shit without a compelling story. My product does not mean shit without a compelling story. And I'll say that, and I'll have anyone who's attending repeat that back to me, because it's just so vitally important. If you do not have a good story behind your product, if you do not have a good customer narrative or an audience focused narrative, then you ultimately are trying to win based on what a widget can do, based on a specific feature. And when you're competing on features, ultimately, what ends up happening is you are liable to lose based on, you didn't have the perfect integration, or so-and-so had one more thing than you had, or the competitor was able to discount more than you could discount, or your audience, your buyer just opts for status quo and doing the same thing they've always been doing. They opt out completely. And that's what happens when you sell at the product level. When you sell at the story level, at the vision level, what you're doing is you're able to essentially connect with them in a totally different way, in an emotional way, where you're aligning them with the way kind of the world is supposed to be for them, and they want to get on board that rocket ship at the end of the day.
I love it because you say on your site, sell your vision. It's not, you may have a problem, but not a product problem. And I just got to bring it in. You comment, you don't want a pitch that sucks or shit.
She. You don't know she.
Now that's from The Wire, and you can tell right off the jump if somebody doesn't know shit in their presentation or product. And I love it. So go to the case studies. I just had to get that in. I've been wanting to work in the bobblehead from The Wire for the longest, and you teed it up for me. But good story, bad story, because everybody's talking about storytelling. You know what's worse than not having a story? A bad story. You do a lot with demo call reviews, pitch decks, investors. It's all about getting that seed money. You really work intricately with that. And you've got this podcast and this speaking thing. So when you work with a client that's, they're established startup and they're trying to scale up, do you have a passion for more of the newbies or the ones that are scaled up, or whatever it takes? You're there to solve their problem.
That's a really interesting question. It's a passion for both, to be honest. And I especially, on the newbies side, I especially love when it's working on a pitch deck for a pitch competition they might be entering, because in a competition, that's where a lot of the showmanship or the showpersonship can come in and really help win your case over, because you're trying to win over, an audience or a crowd of some kind. And you can get really creative there. Now on the, the side of the scaling companies or the established companies, and we're working on their sales narrative, I find a ton of joy in that as well, because it's a different type of challenge, right? It's not how do we impress an audience in a one-off scenario? It's how do we do this on a repeatable basis, 3 calls a day, 5 days a week that an individual rep might have. But at a company level, it's, if you got 10 reps and they're each doing 3-4 calls a day, that's 200 calls in a week. It's 800 calls in a month or so. So at that level, it's not just how do you come up with an interesting one-off, but how do you have a scalable narrative? And then when you add your 11th person and your 12th person, how do you make sure it scales with them? And so I really, I enjoyed the challenge that comes with that, because you have to have something that can be repeatable and scalable.
Yeah, scalable, repeatable, and getting that market share. One of the things that I really wanted to kind of jump back is the inception of Startup Hypeman. How did this come about? I mean, I've read your bio. We've talked in the past. I know you went to DePaul University, sports director, PA announcer. You rap, you spit rhymes, but you take it from a business case study. How did you come up with the Startup Hypeman? How did this inception go from you're an entrepreneur and now you're helping entrepreneurs and startups and business owners? The birth of the Startup Hypeman.
It's an interesting, or I don't know, maybe it's not an interesting story, but I think the fundamental starting point with all this is just understanding how my brain works. And for as long as I can remember, and really, to be honest, probably since I was having my own independent thoughts, I have so much gravitated towards this concept of communication and how people communicate and why do they communicate. I remember in 6th grade in English class, we had a persuasive writing unit. And during that unit, which lasts 6 weeks, 8 weeks long, I went with my family. We had a dinner party at a friend's house. And I happened to see at that my parents' friends on their bookshelf, there was a book called How to Persuade Your Audience in 30 seconds or less, or in 60 seconds or less, something like that. I think the author was Milo Hamilton, if I believe. But, 6th grade me was pulling that book off the shelf and saying, hey, can I borrow this? Because this is interesting to me. And I know I have this unit on persuasive writing that I should be thinking about. So I've always just gravitated towards that, the art of communication, which is also why, as I've been a big wrestling fan all my life. And that's wrestling is, for everyone listening, I know it's staged, but it is the art of communication. And it's the art of how do you convince an audience of your case, of you. If you're the bad guy, how do you convince the audience that they should believe in you as the bad guy? If you're the good guy, why should they believe in you as the good guy? So that's just how my brain has always operated. But then from a professional sense, I worked in marketing for a few years at an agency selling digital products. I transitioned to the sales side of things. And I really had an experience there where I wasn't trained up properly and I didn't succeed. And I spent a lot of my spare time working on our marketing materials, working on our presentations, saying there's a way we can do this better. I ended up starting my own business before Startup Hypeman, and that was called Idea Lemon. And what my co-founder and I worked on for that was helping people develop their personal brands, which did involve working with several entrepreneurs. And the thing we were best at was your own personal elevator pitch. What do you say when someone says, what do you do? And so that pitch stuff, the seedling of it was there. We couldn't sustain that company, so we had to sunset that. But then I got an opportunity kind of simultaneously with an incubator here in Chicago called Bunker Labs, which is a incubator for military veteran and active service member and their family entrepreneurs. And so I got this playground to work with 20 different startups. And that was just such a fun experience that I said, I got to keep doing this. And then I made a decision from there that we're going to go with this company. Little known fact, it was not called Startup Hypeman until 2 years in.
All right.
I had the very, very alliteration heavy, but very hard to get out and impossible to describe company name of RajNATION Innovation. And anytime I would say RajNATION Innovation, I always felt this need to qualify why it was called that, or I'd be like, but don't worry about the name, because it was a mouthful, right? And then again, it was probably maybe a year and a half in, or close to 2 years in. I don't remember exactly how it came up, and it must have been someone said to me, "So you're like a hype man, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." I don't remember what happened, but to me, that has to be what the scenario was. And then I made that change to Startup Hypeman.
I love it because you said a lot of things about the journey. You started from it as an entrepreneur, and you said the word performance. and it's well documented in your presentations on your website that your pitch is a performance. You got one shot, like The Rock. You smell what The Rock is cooking. He's bringing it, whatever the case is. And I look at the Startup Hype Man logo, and I'm going, okay, I know there's like a little Jordan-esque here with Chicago element. Yeah. I'm curious about that. Yoga instructor too. This guy does a lot here, man. And the podcast we're going to get into, but we're smack dab in this pandemic, I guess, and virtual world, and presentations aren't face to face. Quick takeaways on making your pitch and your presentation through elements and video. You've learned a lot we all have learned through this journey. And, I'm a big proponent of video as you are, but is there key takeaways RajNATION could drop on video elements for presentations?
Definitely. So, you're using Zoom, you're using Microsoft Teams, using Google Meet, whatever that might be. A couple of key things you want to keep in mind. Number one is have your camera on. In fact, Gong a couple of years ago released some data on the win rates go up like 40% or something like that, maybe even more than that when camera is turned on. Because if your camera is off, you want to, as best possible, mimic or replicate a face-to-face scenario. And if it's face to avatar or face to screen, that's not going to cut it. So you want to have your camera on, even if the person you're talking to doesn't have theirs on. Keep yours on, and also encourage them, invite them. If they don't have it on naturally, you can, you don't want to force them, but invite them. Hey, I'm going to have my camera on the whole time. Would love to catch your face as well. And it doesn't bother me if you have a messy background or anything like that. Usually they'll be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Or they'll be like, yeah, I'm give me like 2 minutes. I just want to, rearrange some things and I'll turn my camera on. So invite them to turn their camera on.
Sure.
Another thing that's really important as well, and I really stress on this is, and I say this being cognizant that not everyone has the liberty of being able to like adjust their background just based on living situation and what your work from home setup looks like. But as best as possible, given your work from home setup, and granted, I'm in my office right now, so I've got a little bit more leeway. But even when I was at home, I would adjust this. Make your background a reflection of your personality. So like if you look at my background right now, like Doug, just like, what do you see?
Well, obviously, I see The Rock, the wrestling belt, The Rock again. I see Chicago represented in a picture on air because you're a mic spokesman. Got a windowsill of a plant behind you. It probably needs to be watered, but right above you is a picture, but it's all good. It's all good. But the more importantly, you're centered. Okay. You're centered for this interview. So the lighting's natural in a sense. I'm going deep. It's what I do. But I see a lot, of imagery, and obviously from the standpoint, I try to put a little imagery here too. Okay.
Of course.
I got the Startup Hype Man logo because you're my guest, D-Fresh, the Boombox. We're going to get into hype videos or rap videos and rap when you do production work on that if we got time. But yeah, I get it. Well,
and I look at your background, and if I had never talked to you before this, I would get an immediate sense of your personality. Because if you got a boombox back there, there's a decent chance, halfway decent chance, you're into music. And specifically it being a boombox, I could make the assumption or the guess that you're probably into hip hop or were into hip hop, because no one really associates a boombox with like heavy metal, right?
Right.
So that's a potential conversation point. You got, looks like Grover there in an Atlanta Braves hat. So I can talk to you about the Muppets. I can talk to you about baseball. You got the emoji back there, right? So I'm getting a sense for some element of your personality within this, and then the D-Fresh thing in there. So I know you might be a little bit like be able to like joke about who you are and your personality and all that kind of stuff. And it's clean as well. So I say all these things because I have a starting point of conversation with you that is better than, oh, how's the weather down there?
Exactly.
Or the one that just bothers me so much, and it's come up so much over the last year, is, so like, how are things going over there with the pandemic? And it's like, I don't know, it sucks. It sucks here, it sucks there. Like,
exactly.
Why is that the start of our conversation? And I'll tell you on my side, the number of conversations that have started off on the right foot, because they'll be like, is that a championship belt? Where did you get that? Or like, is that the Kobe book? How was that? Or, oh, Hamilton, are you into Hamilton? Right. And these are all things that I love to talk about. And when you think about if the starting point of your conversation is a common interest or a common like, or being able to talk about something that you love, think about how much better that conversation is going to go and how much better that relationship is going to be that you build.
It's playing into those visual elements. And obviously when you're doing pitches, presentations, the element of video, especially now, if you can't travel, it's paramount. Yeah, the boombox, yeah, that's a 1985 legit boombox.
That's awesome.
Got the Eric B. and Rakim shirt on,
Oh,
that's how I
nice.
wrote. So,
Yeah.
and to keep it 100 in layman's terms, so you picked up on all that. But I've always been a big advocate of what you do. We're talking about the rock presentations, and presentation is your performance. Now, if we're getting in deep, let's talk a little bit about, I love the creative concepts that you bring, and I encourage everybody to check out, Google him, check out his TEDx video about vulnerability, check out all his work. We'll have all the links below, but the rap videos for presentation pitches and the hype songs, is a hype song something new, or is that a continuation of that? Drop it in layman's terms for me.
Yeah, it's a newer offering that I've created with Startup Hypeman, where I call it Hype Songs, where we are taking, we're making rap songs on behalf of companies for the purpose of, for example, like a Facebook ad, or to put into their cold email campaigns, or to throw up as a post, or to use to kick off a conference, right? So it's got multiple use cases here. It's either like, hey, let's take your pitch and literally turn it into a performance through song and video. Or is there something in particular you want to promote? Like, are you trying to do a build up to an event? Or do you want, when you have that big event, that big conference that's virtual or maybe hybrid or whatever it is, do you want to open by getting the crowd for real hyped up on your brand, on your theme? And I think the idea behind this ultimately is like, this is how you literally get people singing your tune in their head. This is how you get people playing your tune in their car while they're driving.
Exactly. 100%.
And it really started on my end. It started on a whim. As you've seen my Fresh Prince remix video, right?
Sure. Absolutely. 100%. So,
and that's driven a ton of revenue for Startup Hypeman over the last couple of years, because it's different, it's unique, it's interesting. But I did it on a whim one day. Like one afternoon, I was like, this seems like an interesting idea. Let me just test it out. And then the response on it was so good. And I still didn't even have the thought to like, oh, I should do this for others, until about, I don't know, maybe a little less than a year ago. Someone saw that video and said, hey, I don't need help with what you're pitching in this video, but would you be able to make a song for our company that we could put into a Facebook funnel ad campaign? And I was like, let's do it. And that was the start of it. And then we've done maybe 4 or 5 companies in total since then, and working on more.
Well, it's all about performance and that audio element. It's like, I'll throw Eric B at you. How can I move the crowd? First of all, ain't no mistakes allowed. That's where you come to you into play. But closing this out, I encourage everybody to check out RajNATION, all the work that he does. He's got an excellent podcast, Startup Hypeman podcast. See it on every streaming unit out there. I'm a subscriber. He's got a great newsletter. When we close this out, you drop the mic for me. Any parting shots? I'm giving you the last word here. RajNATION, bring it.
Parting shot. Stop thinking like an executive. Stop thinking like an entrepreneur, and instead think like an entertainer. Because the entertainer, as you know, Doug, is concerned with one thing. How do I move my audience? How do I make them feel something?
And there you have it. RajNATION, check out his website, check out his podcast. If you're a startup, small business owner, or all types of owners looking to get a better pitch in business, from scaling up to seed money, fund money, whatever the case is, definitely got to check this guy out. He's definitely doing work, and their social proof is there. Don't take my word for it. Check out the testimonials. Check out all what he's doing at all levels. Raj, it's a pleasure to have you on in layman's terms.
Peace and love. Hype man out.
All right. In layman's terms, there you have it.